Welcome back to the BetCanada channel. Katie Caldwell, Jeff Lloyd here with you. We continue our division preview series. Let's get into the AFC South. Another year of this division looking pretty mid. I don't feel inspired by a lot of these teams. Jeff, are the Texans going to run it back?
The Texans, I would say this is probably, in my opinion, one of the easier ones to say, yeah.
Me too.
I just
Yep.
think because, year one, they got out really, really quickly, of CJ
Yes.
Stroud. Then there was the
And D'Amico
concussion, and they
Ryans.
kind of, creeped over the starting line into the playoffs, obviously won a playoff game. Year two, it was a little different. They had, Nico Collins missed a significant amount of time. They were trying to navigate their way till Nico Collins came back.
Hmm.
Stroud wasn't his best in the middle of the season. And then maybe it was overall good for them, obviously, because they were, a young team. Then all of a sudden, December came, they picked up their level of play, went to the playoffs, won yet another game.
Yeah.
And then the offseason came and, they had money invested into the offensive line. They had Laramie Tunsil, who was a good player. They had other needs. They moved on from Laramie Tunsil, certainly made some, acquisitions within that offensive line. The wide receiver group is extremely strong. I think it's
Hmm.
built to suit what's best for CJ Stroud. The
Yep.
Stephon Diggs thing, I think they liked the idea. I don't think they ever thought it was going to be a long term thing. Certainly, Diggs' injury kind of accelerated that, along with the fact that maybe Houston realized, wow, we brought in Stephon Diggs, but maybe Nico Collins at this point is an overall better wide receiver. I think the Joe Mixon addiction was absolutely much better than
Oh,
I
yeah.
honestly thought
Yeah.
it was going to
Me
be.
too. Yep.
Because you figured here was a guy that kind of was just set in Cincinnati, and then all of
Hmm.
a sudden that relationship was over, and you kind of figured, he seemed like he was cool to stay there, and then it was like, well, if the Bengals moved on, maybe there's nothing there anymore, and then he
Yeah.
just went down to Houston, and certainly excelled as a runner, as a receiver, which makes the addition of Nick Chubb, in my opinion, you know. I want to see Nick's success for Nick Chubb. I am okay that
Hmm.
Nick Chubb has moved on, certainly from the Cleveland Browns. But my wondering is just exactly where would the role be? Because if, Mixon's the guy, obviously, that you can run with or throw it to.
Yeah.
Chubb receiving has kind of always been the weaker part of his game. So if Nick Chubb comes on the field as, a defensive guy, I'm thinking, well, the probability of a run here is probably pretty high.
Yeah.
But again, if Nick is still good and Nick is still okay, it's not going to matter. It certainly didn't
Hmm.
matter, when he was at his best. Defensively, the secondary is nice. I think Will Anderson, and we're in this part of the NFL where there are so many good edge players.
Yes.
Like you can make, and I actually was joking with, some content friends the other day, and it was like, well, make your list of top 10 underappreciated pass rushers. And that list alone would just absolutely blow your mind. And I think
Yeah.
Will Anderson is obviously one of those guys. Danielle
He's a
Hunter
game
down
wrecker.
there in
Yep.
Houston, another one. I mean, these two, they are their starting edges. And if you get people to talk about edge play in the NFL, they could probably go on for 20, 25 minutes before they even got to the Will Andersons of the world, the
Mhm.
Danielle Hunters of the world. That's just how deep the overall talent is in the NFL nowadays. I think, again, I don't see how they don't win this division this year
Mhm.
unless something catastrophic maybe happened overall. And obviously, you never want to see it work that way. The head coach, when they brought him in, everybody knew it was going to be success right away. The CJ Stroud, trade
Mhm.
was a huge thing right away. And, people making fun of the Browns for the Watson trade and everything that they gave to the Texans. But really, the only player Houston's gotten out of those picks is really Will Anderson. And
Right.
obviously, that was a gem of a selection.
Mhm.
So, they're a really well put together team. I think they really know what they're, capable of. But Stroud with Collins, with Mixon, the offensive line, it's probably going to be a little bit of a work in progress
Yeah.
early in the season before everybody kind of gets that gel going. You certainly don't like that for the hopes of your passing game or for your
Mhm.
quarterback. But I think Houston, can basically navigate through that because I think the level for Houston and what's below them in this AFC South kind of gives them a, 2 to 3 game kind of handicap.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking at their depth chart this morning, and my two big takeaways were I do worry about this offensive line, and man, I love this defense when I'm looking at it on paper. Let's move into the next team. I've kind of gone back and forth between the Jags and the Colts here. Let's start with the Jags. So they've got a healthy Trevor Lawrence back, which is huge. I don't mind their defense. I don't love their secondary, and I do have worries about maybe their interior D line. But man, on offense, they've got a solid receiving core now with the addition of Travis Hunter. And I'm just so curious to see how he ends up working with that team, how they utilize him with everything. What's your read on the Jags this year?
Yeah, like the Hunter thing, like if you saw it coming and you were kind of like, and we should have honestly, because there was a point, where he and Shador Sanders were doing that podcast. And he basically said in one of them, he's like, "Oh, well, Jacksonville will be my place, man. It's my team. It's where I'm from." And
I
it
missed
almost seemed
that.
like, yeah. And this was done during the
Wow.
college season. I think they were talking
Yeah.
about Madden or whatever, because like one of the guys, well, you always play with the Jaguars. Well, that's my team. It's where I'm from. So it was almost kind of like Hunter kind of dropped the tidbit, like that would be the idea. And also,
Wow.
look, anybody who's about to make money in professional sports knows you want to live in Florida. You don't want that state income tax. You
The
want
tax.
more money. You're going to walk away with,
Yeah.
obviously. Um, so now, and even still, like, and I think this is the thing that's kind of cool with Jacksonville is we don't know exactly. This is the only player you can say this about. You don't necessarily know what Jacksonville's truly going to do with him.
It's
Are you
true.
truly going to try to have a guy that goes close to both ways? Are you going to say, you know what, him, Brian Thomas Jr., Trevor Lawrence,
Mhm.
are we trying to get maybe our own little Cincinnati thing going on down here in Jacksonville? And you know what? We'll figure out the defensive side if we have to.
Mhm. Another
Me
unique
personally,
thing with him that I just want to point out too, where if you do want to use him in both ways, that's really great. You basically have two players for the price of one. I also worry that if, God forbid, this player gets injured, you lose two key spots rather than one. So that's kind of a unique challenge that I haven't heard as many people talk about too.
I absolutely, and this is one of the things I harped on during the draft process and why I basically said you can't view him as a two-way player. You
Hmm.
can't. So you draft him on whatever you think he's best at. If you get a little more, that's fantastic. It
Great.
truly
Yeah.
is. But if you say he's going to go, 85 to 90% on offense and 65, 70% on defense, you lose that guy. You're up the
You're
creek
pooped.
without a paddle, so
Yeah.
to speak. There's just no way around it because
Yeah.
he's just become such an important player on your team. Me personally, I'll start him. My ideal scenario would be is I would play him as much as I could at wide receiver.
Me
I
too.
would give him some nickel and dime reps, but I don't even know if I'd play corner. I mean, I put him in the middle of the field and go find the ball. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying? What's different? Go just be a true free safety. Go look for the ball. Because the reason I say that is that way he can be in all the offensive meetings. It's a lot easier to take him on defense and just say, hey, you've got this area on the field. Go cover that area.
Hmm.
Not necessarily a specific player, because the communicating of, hey, I'm handing this receiver off to you now. He's no longer my responsibility. That's going to be a really difficult thing for a player to do when he's trying to work on two different sides of the ball. That's just not going to be very easy.
Hmm.
And if he goes out there and he's a 80 reception, 1,100-yard guy, he doesn't need to do anything else.
No.
That's certainly good enough. It is more than good enough. Now, the defensive side of the ball is where it gets interesting. Now, Walker was a number one pick for them, overall pick a couple of years ago. And I would say up until about the middle of last year, everybody was damning the pick.
Hmm.
But now all of a sudden, the athleticism started, I mean, the intelligence and the understanding and knowledge of the league started to catch up with the overall athleticism. And
Right.
he was a guy that was really, really starting to catch on. Certainly, Josh Hines Allen has been had a reputation for himself in this league for quite a while. So again, another team with a nice looking pass rusher
Hmm.
duo that people don't talk about. Certainly the secondary. Now, how do you look at it? Is Travis Hunter part of that? If he is, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's you have some questions. Darnell Savage was brought in. He's going to play some
Hmm.
safety. Jordan Lewis is your new nickel down there. Tyson Campbell's been a stalwart there for years. Eric Murray's a veteran. It kind of seems to me like Eric Murray's going to be the guy that kind of plays, and then the guy that maybe comes off the field when they want to get Hunter into it.
Mm.
Um, all of it for them, I think, comes down to Lawrence and Can he play like he did a couple of years ago, where they got to the playoffs, got down big, still ended up
Yeah.
winning that game? Because, you have now a first round investment in your quarterback, two first round investments in wide receivers as your playmakers. You certainly have pass rushers. You have some players in the secondary. I think Jacksonville certainly is a sneaky competitor for a wild card.
Okay.
But I think a lot of it's gonna come down to, how do they handle the games with Houston?
Mhm.
That's gonna be key for them because, once you start playing these teams that are playoff caliber teams year in, year out, that's your barometer.
That's
And,
right.
I think for Jacksonville, that's gonna be the key. But, I think Jacksonville certainly should be knocking on the door there. The
Okay.
offensive line could be good and, but also that's saying not saying much from what they have been.
Exactly.
Um, and, I still think, obviously a lot of it is going to be, what Hunter ultimately brings them
I agree.
because you spent the number 2 overall pick on this guy. Not only did you trade up to get him, but you also
Mhm.
gave up your first round pick in 2026. So Jacksonville's expecting a large, large return investment from Travis Hunter.
Yep.
And then if they don't get it, all of a sudden now that maybe alters the way things look because you don't get a major swing of the bat in the first round in 2026.
The Travis Hunter of it all makes that team so, so interesting. They're a
It makes
must
them
watch
likable.
simply because of that.
It makes them very likable. It makes them very interesting.
Yep.
There's no question about it.
Quick pause. If you haven't subscribed to the BetCanada YouTube channel, you can do so below. It's free and it helps support our channel so we can keep bringing you NFL and NHL content. Now, back to the show. So next I probably have the Colts. This one to me, so much of it just comes down to the Anthony Richardson, whether I don't think it's going to be Daniel Jones. I'm curious to see how his development is going through the off season, how it goes through the season. The Anthony Richardson of it all is pretty interesting to me. I liked their free agency. I liked their draft. To me, so much of what I'm going to be keeping an eye on is just the quarterback situation.
Well, I mean, we're talking about Richardson, and here we are now going into year 3.
Yeah.
And it's all the injury talk. And we're talking about a guy who's 6'4" and change, 230 pounds. This absolute freak of an athlete. He's not
Hmm.
small, but yet he seems like he's very fragile. Um, and for the Colts, where is the direction here? Because obviously all of this season should
Where's
100%
the
be
direction?
about where what he can bring them. But now, hey, well, right now the shoulder's dinged up, it's still dinged up, and it's like, well, what do you mean? It's still, and then you spend, I guess it was the 14 million plus on Daniel Jones, which it was like, well, okay, if you have questions about Anthony Richardson, your insurance policy is Daniel Jones. Okay. Like, I don't
Okay.
know necessarily what to do with that, especially when
Yeah.
you have certainly receivers and Pierce and Pittman, and you have that type of talent. You brought in Tyler Warren, which just blows my mind because my entire draft process, every time I saw Tyler Warren, I thought of former Colts tight end Dallas Clark. So it was like, well, the
Okay.
Colts take Tyler Warren. Okay, of course, it totally makes sense. It seems like they just drafted Dallas Clark Jr.
Yeah.
You certainly have a great, great running back. Taylor is just a fantastic player. And
Mhm.
Taylor's one of those guys you watch and it's all you look and it's 14 carries, 57 yards. Then all of a sudden you blink and it's 16 for 102 because he's that guy that just leans on you, leans on you, leans on, and then all of a sudden there's the big one. Always been very consistent with his play and that approach. Defensively, there's some guys that I think just need to step up and just overall be better. And they really haven't gotten it to this point. Their pass rushers, Quiddy Pay is a nice name, but certainly never returned the first round investment. Latu, again, I mean, these guys should be 12, 13 sack per year guys. That's the
Mhm.
expectation when you are a pass rusher and you were drafted in the first round. And they really kind of haven't gotten that. The secondary, I like Nick Cross. He's been a good player for a couple of years, but the rest of it, Charvarius Ward, again, like good teams like the Chiefs, they give up on a player. No, you didn't get a score. The reason the Chiefs are the Chiefs is they know to get out of a situation 1 year early as opposed to 1 year too late. So
That's a good way of articulating it. Yeah.
their secondary, when you say, oh, well, you got to go handle Houston, you got to go
Mhm.
handle now Jacksonville. I don't think that secondary is necessarily good enough to do it, nor do I think the pass rush is going to make the difference against those teams.
Mm.
So, for the Colts, and again, if you go and you win 6, 7, 8 games, that's great. Now you're drafting 17 or 18 in the draft, and most likely you need a quarterback.
Mhm.
Because if you didn't win much or Richardson didn't play much, the Anthony Richardson experience is over.
Yep.
Daniel Jones, he's another one of these guys in a long line where we're going to start using but Sam Darnold, but Sam Darnold. I mean, and let's be honest, we're not going to get a Sam Darnold every single year.
No.
And let's see how Sam Darnold does in Seattle before we start using this as basically a elevator to greatness for Sam Darnold.
Yes.
Just because it went well, maybe Minnesota was just built so well
Yeah,
that
he
it was
also
able
had
for Sam.
Justin Jefferson and
Sure, Jordan Addison, you had a tight end, the defense played pretty well, there were a
Mhm.
lot of things,
You have
and then
great
once all of a
coaching,
sudden,
yep.
yep, and then you got to the really good teams in week 18 in the playoffs, and all of a sudden Sam Darnold was kind of the Sam Darnold we had all seen up until this point.
There he is.
But for the Colts, I also think for the Colts, I've always, me and my friends like had always talked about this, within sports, was the God factor, like a team that's going through a difficult spot. Look, this team just lost their owner, and everybody knows what kind of part of that franchise he was. To just
Yes.
say he was the owner was one thing. And, sometimes, when something like that goes on within any type of sports club, all of a sudden you get a team that maybe starts playing a little bit above their heads because in
Mm.
situations like that, all of a sudden maybe, you find it a little bit easier to give a little bit more. Or it just, you get a lucky
Mm.
break and, can mean all the things in the world. But if you're looking at this in straight black and white, I look at that quarterback position between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. And I don't think there's anybody that can say with any great faith that they believe Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones
Mhm.
have the ability to lead the Indianapolis Colts to a winning season. Richardson to
Yeah.
this point has not, even when Richardson has played, it's really not been that great. There've been highlights,
That's the
but it's
thing,
not
we
like you
see
break.
the ceiling, like, there was one touchdown shoot, who was that? There was one touchdown I can picture in my brain, and I'm just watching it going, "Oh, there's the Richardson that everybody's talked about, and, like, there's the ceiling," but then when you see the floor, you're like, "Oh god, there's quite a variance in between the ceiling and the floor with Richardson." The Jimmy Irsay of it all, I hadn't really thought about that in terms of how that translates to the play on the field because you're absolutely right. Things like that, and especially with someone that is so integrated into the heart and soul of the culture of the team, that is an interesting point too, where they're going to be playing for the Irsay family with that as well.
Yes, and as it takes over, obviously his daughters become more of a fixture within this.
Yeah,
And
which
and
they've already had heavy involvement, which is really cool
yeah,
for
but I
their
mean,
transition into it.
you've got these players who are going to be looking into Jim Irsay's daughter's eyes, and you know what I'm saying, and knowing what's at stake
Yeah,
for that family,
yeah.
and saying, hey, I want to we want to bring a smile to these girls' face. These
Mhm,
girls obviously been through enough, and it's got to be tough enough for them because it was, hey, yes, we're a part of all this, and it's our dad's team, we're a part of it. It's
mhm.
eventually going to be our team, but in those scenarios, you want that basically progression to happen naturally, not
Yes,
for it to be
that's right.
forced because unfortunately Jim Irsay left us early.
Yeah.
And to a man, there's gonna be a lot of people looking in those women's eyes and
Mhm.
realizing, hey man, your dad was really good to us. You know what I'm saying? I got
Yeah,
a lot of money that your dad was willing to give to me. And I think we owe it to you all to give you everything
yeah.
we got. And that's certainly, what is probably gonna make for an interesting storyline for the Colts this year.
Mhm.
But they got to get
Oh,
something out of behind center.
they definitely do. But yeah, I am cheering for them this season. There is definitely some emotion behind the Colts this season. I think a lot of people are going to be feeling that. Okay, last one. Let's do the Titans simply because we have to. So this one to me, there is potential. I'm excited to see Cam Ward. Do I think he has enough weapons to succeed at this point in time? No, I don't. To me, Jeff, there are simply just too many holes on this team. Their defense to me is maybe decent as at best. I think they're at least one more year out. But who knows? I go out and prove me wrong. But what's your read on the Titans? To me, they're just a clear bottom of the division for me.
I won't say that they're locked into it because if
Okay.
you told me that Cam Ward could be a better quarterback in 2025 than the Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson combination in Indianapolis, I don't think I can necessarily argue with you. I
Hmm.
mean, because at least with Cam Ward, we have hey, we haven't seen it yet. For Richardson and Jones, we've seen it, and from what we've seen, most of it tells us that no, 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 it's probably not it. The thing that probably gives me some concern with the Titans is you look at what they've done here offensive line wise. 2023, they drafted Peter Skoronski, who was a left tackle out of Northwestern. Everybody liked his game, but what did everybody say? He's probably going to end up being a guard. So you
Mhm.
took a high selection, and guess what? Where's Peter Skoronski nowadays? He's playing left guard. No
That's right.
disrespect to the guard position,
Yeah.
but you spent a high first round pick on this guy, and he's now playing guard.
Mhm.
A year later, you made the mistake that the Cleveland Browns made years ago with Jedrick Wills. You drafted J.C. Latham, who had only been a right tackle, and you drafted him with the intention of making him a left tackle. They played him at left tackle. His grades by PFF weren't very good. He got beat from pillar to post and gave up a lot of sacks. So guess what? Now you spend another high first round pick, and now J.C. Latham is your right tackle.
Mhm.
So if you're spending these picks, they better be the guy at left tackle because now you have a high priced left guard, you have a high priced right tackle. I liked the addition of Kevin Zeitler because I think you have some young players within this offensive line that maybe need to look at a guy who's played 12 to 13 years in the NFL and understand what the business end of it truly is. And I think they're going to get that with Kevin Zeitler. I think Calvin Ridley and I think Ward will be a nice pairing. The Tyler Lockett acquisition is interesting because, you know, if you ask people who cover Seattle, they're trying to tell you that Tyler Lockett was no longer Tyler Lockett. Maybe that's the case, but Tyler Lockett's going to get to write that story for himself here.
And
I
I'd
think
need to see it to believe it. Also I am a Seahawks fan, so there is a lot of bias there. But man, I'm not ready to give up on Tyler Lockett yet. There, man, the flashes that you still see from him, like I said, I need to see it to believe it that he's washed.
Well, I think Tyler Lockett's going to be a guy that's going to be able to run routes till he's 55 years old. You know what
Me
I'm saying?
too.
Is it good? Yeah, he was just always that guy.
Yeah.
So I think I wouldn't be betting against Tyler Lockett in any
No.
scenario whatsoever. I do like the makeup of their defense. I think they have some solid players in solid positions. I've always been a Jeffrey Simmons guy. I think
Mhm.
he's a very good player. Tavondre Sweat gave them exactly what they were hoping for. Simmons is a bigger guy, but is a playmaker on the interior. Whereas you kind of want to take Sweat and just say, all right, I will inhale your center and both guards, and I don't care. Everybody else will go and be able to make plays. But I think outside of that, overall, there's just not a lot of overall talent for this team.
Mhm.
Jadarius Sneed is not a bad corner. But when you're talking about him as your number one corner, all of a sudden, that name maybe doesn't seem there. Brownlee again, another corner there. I just don't see it on the defensive side of the ball there yet for Tennessee.
Mhm.
I do think the bringing in of Xavier Restrepo for Cam Ward because they had such a great relationship at Miami was probably a quiet, sneaky move that I think could pay some dividends for Tennessee because there's not going to, it's good for Cam Ward to go out there and have that guy that he doesn't have to work that hard to build the
Mhm.
rapport with. Every quarterback's kind of going to need their guy, their dude. And I think that's certainly there for them. The offensive line, and look, Bill Callahan, who I got to watch with the Cleveland Browns, work with that offensive line for years. you know, you're hoping he can spin some magic, but I think that's one of the biggest things that maybe coaches maybe get credit for sometimes that they don't necessarily deserve. Oh, look what the job he did with, well, they were all great, yeah, so they played great under a great head coach. But even the greatest of coaches, the greatest of chefs, you need some ingredients, you need some guys to be able to work with and put it all together,
Mhm.
and that's my concern here, certainly for the Tennessee Titans. Um, Again, I wouldn't be stunned if they end up third in this division because of the uncertainty of what's going on, certainly with the Indianapolis Colts. Um, you know, the running game that's so predicative on the offensive line. So is
Mhm.
Pollard and Tyjae Spears going to be able to give you what you need to support the rookie quarterback? It's definitely a growing time for Tennessee. They had to take Ward because now you have this head coach who's going into year 3, and you had 2 years of Will Levis that just, basically felt like a wasted
Yeah.
couple of years, certainly for Tennessee, and certainly, for your coach down there in Callahan. So it's, Tennessee, it's time to make a jump
Mhm.
in Tennessee, but I think Do I think they're on the par where I think New England's going to make a jump? No.
Mm.
Do I think Tennessee's going to be better than the team that drafted number one overall? Yeah, certainly. But I don't think we're talking, January meaningful football in Tennessee, at least for this year.